Hi, I'm Tasha, and this is Parents of Mouth Breathers. It's a podcast for parents who are done being dismissed, told your child will grow out of it, and you want to advocate for your child's health. I'm going to share some really interesting insights and interview some experts as well so that you can be informed about your child's airway health. Because I have found that being informed has been the best way to get the help that my son needs. So today's episode is a personal one. In fact, they all are, but it's just really wanting to offer some reassurance to you because I have been in the position whereby I've been in consulting rooms and been looked at funny and judged for asking questions and pushing back a little bit. So I want to bring light to the fact that sometimes when we go into a doctor's room or into a hospital room and we're meeting with a consultant, we can come across as a bit pedantic or anxious as a mum in particular. What I've realised is we're not really anxious, we're just very attuned to our children. And I want to open with that. If you've ever been made to feel like you're a bit too intense, too much, too dramatic, then this is really for you. I've been called anxious, paranoid, an overthinker way more times than I can count, and not just by medical professionals, but also in conversation with family members, and in general conversations with people, talking about my concerns around my son's mouth breathing, and told that it's probably nothing and that it's just a phase. One ENT appointment sticks out sorely when I was quoting research about sleep disordered breathing and basically laughed out of the room. The surgeon shrugged when I shared some of the insights that I'd learned about sleep disordered breathing and my concerns around it. Now I'm unwavering in my conviction. I wasn't anxious, I wasn't paranoid, I was absolutely right. I think it's probably best if I tell you a little bit about my son first. He's 5 now, but realistically, for most of his young life, he's been pretty exhausted. He snored so loudly, and he still does, that we could hear him through the walls. He has always slept with his mouth open, his neck cranked back quite a lot, taking large gasps of air, pausing when he was breathing, sweating a lot, tossing and turning, and just very unsettled. He would often wake up inconsolable and take some time to settle back down. In the daytime, he was angry, agitated, a bit wild, but also I saw a sadness in him. He was quite withdrawn. He found it very difficult with transitions and showed signs of struggling with simple instructions. And I knew that it wasn't just temperament. You can have a stubborn child, but you can have a child that's also chronically exhausted because they're not getting the rest and the oxygen that they need. I knew something was off. When I had my second son, I noticed a difference in how he slept really quietly, mouth closed, no gasping. And that was a reinforcement that provided me with a nudge to push for my eldest. It becomes so familiar to you that you get used to it, but that doesn't mean that it's normal. So when I eventually brought my concerns to the GP, it was the usual sort of script. Kid snore, he's a boy, they're pretty full on. Let's give it time. I had also brought concerns about how sick he was all the time. He seemed to be chronically congested and always picking up the latest bug. I had heard that because he was a COVID baby, there was more chance of him getting that. It took a longer time for their immune system to build. But the fact that he snored and that he breathed through his mouth didn't seem to be an immediate concern for the doctor at that time. I then discovered the episode of James Nestor on Diary of a CEO. That really gave me the impetus to keep going. I wrote letters, I recorded lots of videos of his sleep, I took notes, I described everything in detail, his symptoms, his history, his behaviour, and eventually we did get a referral to ENT. Now, the first appointment was very disappointing. And for any parent that knows, when you're waiting to see a specialist, you are building yourself up to that appointment because you're hoping you're going to get some answers and some help for your child. but this one was seriously disappointing. The doctor glanced at his tonsils and said there was nothing to worry about. He dismissed the tongue tie that I had released previously, rolled his eyes when I mentioned the books Breathe and Jaws, which I had with me, and said something along the lines of it's normal for everybody to have episodes of apnea. I left feeling really angry, but not deterred, because I knew that this particular surgeon didn't want to engage much in the conversation about sleep disordered breathing, stuff that I brought to the table. Also, there was a difficulty in communication because he had a very thick accent and it was really difficult to understand what he was saying. He was quite incoherent as well when he was responding. So it just added this layer of complexity to it. So I asked for a second opinion. Now, just to interject here, before we saw the ENT for that appointment, I had already seen sort of glimmers of what a better mouth posture would look like, because my son had a tongue tie release. When he slept in particular, he was quieter and calmer and he looked really rested. Unfortunately, those effects didn't last. At the time, I thought it might be because the tongue might have partially reattached, because you're supposed to do exercises after the event, which we didn't and we didn't know about at the time. Anyway, what it proved is that the airway does matter and there was a root cause to it, and that's what we needed to get to. Since then, we saw an airway dentist, which I'm going to talk about in detail, a cranial osteopath as well. We've done sleep trials and made lots of dietary changes. We eliminated dairy, started with nasal sprays. We considered primitive reflex retention, which we're still going to investigate at some point. And the next thing we're doing is myofunctional therapy, which I'll track all of that. I've chased records and referrals and reports, and through it all, I've carried just this feeling, if I hadn't fought as hard as I have, that he would have been missed. Today, really, I wanted to do two things. I want to validate what you already know in your bones. And second, I want to offer some practical steps to help you to get the referrals and the assessments and the support, because I know that just knowing that something's wrong isn't enough. You've got to learn really how to speak the language of these professionals. As a parent, you are attuned to the subtleties that nobody else sees. Those episodes after school, the constant cold, the way their breath smells in the morning, the bags under their eyes, the anger, the clumsiness. Some children, I've heard, they refuse to eat certain textures of food. You can notice the way they tilt their head when they breathe. They aren't isolated quirks, they're signs and they're patterns. And too often they're missed because the system looks at symptoms in silos. So ENT doesn't talk to, say, an osteopath. The GP doesn't talk about, say, birth trauma or sleep. They consider that parenting issues. But effectively, you as the parent, you're the link between it all. So if your child is mouth breathing or snoring, constantly congested, and you've just got that gut feeling that something's off, it is awareness. It's not your job or my job to prove anything to these people. But unfortunately, when you're navigating this system, particularly the NHS here in the UK, that's often exactly what we end up having to do. The loneliness of watching your child suffer and wondering if you're the only one seeing it, sometimes it can chip away at your confidence and you start to second guess even the obvious things. But the reality of it is, it isn't normal or healthy for children to breathe through their mouth. It certainly isn't healthy for them to be taking frequent pauses in their sleep and gasping for air, and to be snoring so loud that you can hear them from the other room. And I always go back to the quote at the very beginning of the episode of The Diary of a CEO with James Nestor, where they do the edit to give you a bit of a clip of what's coming up in the episode. And he says something along the line of, if you can hear your child breathing at all, it's a warning, it's a red flag, get it looked into. And I think there's a discrepancy between the information that we're able to access online these days versus how behind the times somewhere like the NHS is, or the medical system in general. So I want to talk a little bit about strategy if you are where I was a few years ago, where you're sort of desperate for help, but you're hitting brick walls. I'll share some of the things that helped me push forward. I documented everything. I took videos of my son sleeping from the side profile showing his mouth open, the pauses, the gasping. I noted how often he woke, how he behaved the next day, meltdowns, naps, and all that kind of thing. I wrote a cover letter of sorts summarising the full picture of my son's health, so from birth to feeding to sleep behaviour and his general development. And I treated it like almost a brief if I was to meet somebody new and needed to give them a summary of everything that my son had been through. I would include the use of sleep disordered breathing. Using that word is really key. Then I would say you want to be requesting specific referrals. If you're seeing a GP, ask directly for ENT. You say in no uncertain terms, I'm concerned that he's got or she's got obstructive sleep apnea. I'd like an ENT referral to assess his adenoids, tonsils, and airway function. Also, if you suspect gluea with my episode number, you could request to be referred to audiology as they will deal with that. Don't accept being brushed off. If you're told it's normal, you've got to respond with confidence in saying, even though I understand many children snore and it's extremely common, I'm concerned about the impact of his development and behaviour. I'd like a further assessment. You're not being difficult, you're being thorough, and you're being attuned, as we said at the outset. The next thing, which I think is key, is following up relentlessly, calling the surgeries, chasing appointments, ask for cancellations. I went through a stage of requesting access to all noting, and I keep a folder of everything to do with my eldest's health. So that's really good as well, because that's such a great resource to refer to over and over again. When you start getting into this system and you're trying to get all of these referrals, you can forget the steps that you've taken. In terms of the private avenues, you have airway focused dentists. They give you a completely different perspective to the general dentist that you might go and visit. There's osteopaths as well. You want to go for ones that are trained, particularly in pediatric cranial work. They look at all the tension in the neck and the head and all this kind of stuff, which affects how a child breathes. Myofunctional therapists whose primary objective is to reinitiate nasal breathing. And a quick note on alternatives. It is really easy to get overwhelmed. I remember being buried in so much information, searching Google left, right, and center, random obscure blogs, and scrolling through endless Instagram experts, trying to work out which practitioners would be best for my son. And all I would say is I just try and work with practitioners who are clear and they explain clearly, they welcome your questions and respect your role as mum and understand that it's a very unique insight that you have, being that you're with your child the most. You shouldn't feel sold to, you should feel supported. And I think that's the key for me. You're not trying to buy the latest equipment and all this kind of stuff. You really want to get an understanding of what their goals are. And then you can decide whether that's something you want to try. Sometimes we hesitate because we're afraid to be wrong. I definitely did this at the outset, especially because going down the private route comes as a financial cost. You start questioning yourself, what if it is just a phase, or what if I'm pushing too hard and it turns out to be nothing? At times that can keep you quiet, but what I think helps is reframing it. You're not overreacting, you're over invested because it's your child. And that isn't a flaw, that is your job. I think we seem to forget that these days, that our job as parents is to be the ones that are asking questions, to push, because if we're not going to do it for our child, nobody else is, because nobody's going to care about them like we do. I know how lonely this can feel. The late nights, the guilt, the exhaustion, the worry that you're somehow making this all up, that it's just sort of a figment of your imagination. And there's also the fear that you might have missed the boat, because I certainly have felt that as well. I've been on this journey a few years now and I'm still banging my head against a brick wall. My fear is around not getting intervention in time. Things change a lot after a child turns 7 in terms of their facial structure, and you need to look at different treatments at that point. So I'm always worried about that. And there's also the worry that if you push too hard, you're going to be labelled a bit of a nutter. But I just want to be clear that what you're doing is brave. What I'm doing is brave, to keep going when we're dismissed, to keep asking questions when we don't even have the language yet. You can feel a little bit stupid, especially when you've got somebody in a position of perceived authority. They can make you feel a little bit small, but we're the ones that actually allow that to happen. To keep loving your child who's exhausted, overwhelmed, and struggling to be out there in the world, that isn't anxiety. I think that's the fiercest demonstration of being a mother in its most intuitive form. And I'm so proud to be on this journey and know that no matter what happens, my son has got someone behind him that will just be relentless in my pursuit to get him answers. As I mentioned, my eldest is still on his journey. We're still waiting for surgery. I'm still waiting to be confident that surgery is the right decision. I'm still dealing with resistance from some people in his life having comments as though we're being a bit over the top, not letting him have milk or whatever it may be. We're still fielding like the behavioural challenges that are clearly linked to his sleep as well. I mean, that is a daily battle. And I have to remind myself on a daily basis that this is linked to his sleep. This is something that he is struggling with. He's not trying to challenge me. He's actually being challenged himself. The difference is where I'm at now. I no longer doubt myself. I no longer shrink when I'm sitting in front of a GP or a specialist, because I believe that I have value by being his mum and having those insights. Once I've seen it, I can't unsee it. Once I watched Diary of a CEO with James Nestor, I couldn't not listen to what I was hearing. I couldn't pretend that I hadn't heard that. I had to take that information and take some action on it. I've become just so obsessed with this. It's part of the reason why I've started this podcast and this whole movement, is because I'm so passionate about how important airway health is, and yet so angry that it's overlooked and dismissed. It's so frustrating. I've got so much to say on it. And as a fellow parent, no doubt listening to this, or maybe a professional that's passionate about this space, you're the people that I need to share this with, because I could talk to the wall until I'm blue in the face. I'm not going to get anywhere, but sharing it with other people, at least there's some positive that's going to come out of this experience. I'm not here to offer a really neat and tidy resolution, because, as I said, we're still living it. But I hope that I can help you develop the right language, the strength, and the permission to trust yourself, to keep pushing, and to take up the space in front of these professionals in particular, because your child needs that from you. And also, you really deserve that as well. I'm going to reiterate that you are not anxious or paranoid or pedantic or all those other words. You are attuned. And to be an attuned parent is apparently increasingly less common these days. I don't understand people that would see this in their child and don't take action on it. That, I think, is just a massive, monumental failure. We have to do this for our children. We know that it is going to impact them. And I, for one, am not going to sit by and not be proactive in helping him. If this episode resonated, please just take everything that I'm saying and do with it what you want, but know that you have my backing. Feel free to send it to somebody who's also questioning themselves right now. Maybe there's a friend that you've talked to about this and they're just going down this rabbit hole as well. Or even save it for when you're sitting in another sterile office explaining your child for the millionth time to another professional. You just need that little boost of confidence beforehand. Remember, you're not anxious, you're not imagining it, you're not paranoid, you are attuned, and that changes everything. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you again next week. Bye.